like to bring this meeting to order. This is the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security, meeting number 18, and we are today continuing our study of Bill C-391, an act to amend the Criminal Code and Firearms Act, repeal of the long gun registry. We have quite a number of witnesses before us today, and rather than take a lot of time to introduce them right from the beginning, I'm just going to start on my left here and have you each give your presentation. I hope you understand that you're allowed approximately 10 minutes to give a presentation, and then after that we open it up for questions and comments. So who would like to present first? This is the Fédération des Femmes du Québec. Ms. Conradi?
C'est moi, ça.
Oh, okay.
That's me, yes.
Welcome to the committee.
Merci beaucoup. Alors,
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us here before your committee on an extremely important issue. I'll give everyone an opportunity to get their headsets on to hear me in English. So I'm the president of the Fédération des Femmes du Québec. I'm here with Manon Monestès, who is the director of one of the member groups of the Federation, and she and I wanted to make this presentation together. The Fédération des Femmes du Québec has as a mission advocacy for women in all spheres of social and political life. And we represent 175 member organizations throughout Quebec, including the rural regions. We also have 600 individual members. A number of years ago, we were given the mandate through the December 6th Foundation, in other words, the foundation that was established by the family of the victims of Polytechnique, to be responsible for commemorative ceremonies on December 6th. So we essentially coordinate the events for this ceremony. We received the mandate from this agency to be responsible for commemoration. The notion of commemoration is not simply to remember these women who died at the hands of this killer 20 years ago, but also to remember the debates and the issues that have arisen since then. What has led to the long gun registry, a registry that is, in fact, in response to a campaign on the part of friends and family members of the victims of the December 6th attacks. We are here today to speak to your committee in the spirit of supporting maintaining this firearms registry, and we want to celebrate the legacy of all the friends and families of the victims of December 6th. As you can well imagine, from women's groups' perspective, we are particularly concerned about domestic violence and gun registry. I will immediately be handing over the floor to Manon Monestès, who works in a federation that supports women that are victims of domestic violence. Good day. The federation includes 41 women's shelter member groups for women that are abused and in facing difficulties in Quebec. This is about half of the shelters that exist in Quebec. We have about 10,000 women and children that are sheltered there every year. The issue of murder and infanticide on the part of spouses, that is a major concern for the clientele in these women's shelters from the point of view of security and prevention. The Firearms Act led to a number of instances of progress reducing firearms in the context of domestic violence. Long guns, hunting rifles are the weapons that are most often used in cases of domestic attacks, simply because long guns are those that are most often handy in Quebec households, most easily accessible. As you will imagine, as signatories of the brief that we have tabled before your committee, we believe that this Bill 391 sends out a dangerous message. If long guns do not need to be registered, does that mean that they are not a real danger? There are too many examples of the opposite, as the case of Marie-Josie Desmeules, struck down by her husband in December 2009 in Saguenay by he was using his hunting rifle. So these long guns and hunting rifles increase the lethality of the attacks, increasing also the number of victims, and should be considered in a very serious way, as should all other firearms. Since 1995, the province of Quebec, in the area of domestic violence, wants to focus on countering domestic violence by calling on police officers to ensure security for the victims and family members, by seizing firearms as soon as an individual is arrested, or if not, ensuring that interim bail release conditions would call for handing over these weapons to officers. That is the first thing police officers do in Quebec. When they arrive in a situation of domestic violence, it's the first thing that they look into to see whether the spouse or the former spouse or ex-spouse has weapons. Even the Minister for Culture, Communications and Women's Matters in Quebec, Christine Saint-Pierre, said in an interview that if Ottawa were to decide to dismantle the gun registry, the life of police officers in Quebec and that of victims of domestic violence would be compromised, unnecessarily so. The idea of striking this gun registry would essentially remove an essential tool for prevention that is in the hands of police officers, and it would imperil the lives of women and children we have and host in these women's shelters for abused women. We would like to close by saying that the current system for controlling firearms plays an important role in protecting the lives of women in domestic violence situations. We would ask you to reject this bill because it would have a negative effect on the security and the safety of the public and the safety of women and children that we have in our women's shelters. So from that perspective, the registry, including registration for each weapon, would give an indication of each and every weapon that a potential offender would have in his possession. Unfortunately, people that have no criminal history could end up being violent, and we know that the Canadian government subscribes to international conventions. It's an extremely important responsibility, far greater than any inconvenience caused by the fact that one would have to fill out a form to register a firearm. We believe that this gun registry should not be dismantled. The Canadian gun registry, practically half of guns that are used in cases that are not strictly used for hunting purposes. This registry is working. It is important to maintain it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now go over to the Canadian Police Association. The President, Mr. Charles Mommy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. How are you today? Thank you for the committee members for allowing us to speak here today. My name is Charles Mommy, President of the Canadian Police Association. I would also like to introduce to my right Detective Constable Nadine Theft, a member of the Organized Crime Enforcement Guns and Gangs Task Force for the Toronto Police Service, as well as a member of the Canadian Police Association. I will provide you my remarks, which should take, Mr. Chair, about 5 or 6 minutes, and she will finish up for about 3 minutes. The CPA welcomes the opportunity to appear before the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security with regards to Bill C-391. By way of background, the Canadian Police Association is the national voice for 41,000 frontline police personnel serving across Canada. Through our over 150 member associations, the Canadian Police Association membership includes police personnel serving in police services from Canada's smallest towns and villages, as well as those working in our largest municipal cities, provincial police service, members of the RCMP, railway police, and First Nations police associations. Our goal is to work with elected officials from all parties to bring about meaningful reforms to enhance the safety and security of all Canadians, including those sworn to protect our communities. For decades, police associations have been advocating reforms to our justice system in Canada. The CPA has worked very positively with the current government, providing input and support on several pieces of legislation. In fact, this past week I attended a roundtable discussion organized by Public Safety Canada on the review of the DNA Act, yet another tool assisting police in bringing criminals to justice. But when it comes to the long gun registry, we respectfully have a difference of opinion. I'm not here today to inundate the committee with statistical information. Much of that information has already been provided by the RCMP, Canadian Firearms Program, but that type of information is also contained in our brief, which we have circulated to the committee. In 2007, the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program surveyed our frontline officers with regards to online queries of the Canadian Firearms Registry. In total, 56 police services were surveyed from across Canada, 408 police officers in total, 262 of them were general duty patrol officers, 64 were criminal investigators, and 82 were police officer supervisors. The survey results were as follows. 92% of police officers have used the CFRO system, the Canadian Firearms Registry online system. 65% responding that they use CFRO in the day-to-day functions. 73% use CFRO in responding to calls for service. 69% report CFRO influences how they respond to calls for service. And finally, 74% indicate use of CFRO aids in their investigations and operations in policing. We have continuously stated that law enforcement uses the Canadian Firearms Registry. Does every single police officer in this country use the system? Of course not. Do thousands? Very possible. But what we do know for sure is this. In 2009, there were 4 million CFRO queries, of which 45% were auto-linked when using CPIC. The other 55% are specific requests usually related to domestic incidences. The Canadian Firearms Registry is about keeping our community safe, period. I'm here to state that the Long Gun Registry represents one of many tools available to police. As an example, the DNA Databank, the Sex Offender Registry. Those does every single police officer use those tools, the Sex Offender Registry or the DNA Databank? Most likely not. The Gun Registry is a valuable tool which has significant preventative and investigational value used towards keeping our communities safer. Will it solve every gun crime? Will it solve or prevent every firearm death? Of course not. Just like the criminal code does not prevent murders or sexual assaults. Because rifles and shotguns are the firearms most often in people's homes, they are the firearms police most often face when they are called to investigate domestic violence and disturbances. Last week, retired Winnipeg police officers were testifying at this committee, and we agree with them that the most real criminals, gang members, organized crime groups, do not register their guns. There are many examples of the use of the registry by law enforcement, and I'll give you a few. For example, it was evidence from the registry which assisted in the arrest and conviction of 2 men for accessory for their involvement in the 2005 murder of 4 RCMP officers in Marythorpe, Alberta. Specifically through a registered, unrestricted rifle found at the scene of the crime. This information was yet another piece of evidence to their ultimate convictions. Did the registry save the life of these 4 Mounties? No, it did not. But what it did do was bring these individuals to justice. In a second example, NWest provided support to an RCMP detachment after a suspect was stopped with 4 long guns in his vehicle. The suspect was evasive when questioned, leading investigators to believe the firearms had been stolen. NWES conducted CFRO checks on the recovered firearms and determined that all 4 were registered to a local resident and not the person who was in possession of these rifles. Registered owner who was working out of town was contacted by police and said that, as far as he was aware, all of his firearms were safely stored at his residence. Police attended the owner's residence and discovered evidence confirming that his residence had been broken into and that all 16 of his long guns had been stolen. Subsequent investigation resulted in the recovery of the remaining 12 long guns from the suspect. So where would these guns have ended up if we wouldn't have stopped this particular individual? In the hands possibly of real criminals. What would they have planned to do with these particular firearms? Well, I'll allow you to come to your own conclusion in regards to that. I could go on and on with regards to how police use the firearms registry, but let me present you the following facts. The gun registry is now in place. It's not in the planning phases, it's not in the beginning phases, it's in the operational phases. It's working today. By voting in favor of C-391, it will not bring back any of the money originally invested in the creation of the program. Eliminating the long gun registry, we have heard repeatedly, would save Canadians approximately $4 million per year. As police officers, we share the frontline responsibility of keeping our members, our communities safe. Safety of children, women, men across Canada is paramount to everything that we do. In addition, I also have a responsibility to ensure the safety of our membership. To the Canadian Police Association, it is community and police officer safety which is the basis for our opposition to Bill C-391. There has been a great deal of misinformation surrounding this issue, and it has been very confusing to Canadians, including politicians, and yes, on occasion, even our own members. But allow me to make just one final point as I come to the end of my presentation. And like many of you, I have a driver's license and allows me to operate a vehicle, but my vehicle is also registered. So if I can give you a quick example, if I were to stop Chair Breichreitz for speeding after this committee hearing today, as an example, I would suggest to you that Mr. Breichreitz would provide a driver's license, and I would suggest to you that his vehicle would also be registered. And what that would do for me as a police officer is allow me to confirm that, in fact, the vehicle that Mr. Breichreitz is driving is his own, or is it a stolen vehicle? Or is it being used for some other purpose, or has it been involved in some other criminal activity? So that is how I provide the examples of licensing and registration, whether it impacts or deals with vehicles in this country or whether it deals with firearms in this country. So allow me to just pass the floor to my colleague Nadine Thieft, who will be providing you her viewpoints in the next couple of minutes.
Yeah, there's actually less than a minute left, but go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Nadine Thieft, and I've been a member of the Toronto Police Service for almost 20 years, currently assigned to the Integrated Gun and Gang Task Force. When I look at the annual crime gun seizure totals for all firearm types within the Toronto Police Service for 07, 08, and 09, I can see consistently almost half the firearms that could be sourced were from lawful Canadian origins before they were diverted to the illicit firearm market and ultimately used in a criminal act. 50% consistently over the past 3 years is a shocking statistic. In order to curb this trend, the registry proves to be a useful tool in enforcement initiatives to ensure compliance. Domestic crime guns started in the hands of legal gun owners and have served as the primary rationale for creating and maintaining the firearm registry in Canada. The belief was that licensing firearm owners would increase the accountability of individual firearm owners. It was believed that owners would comply with the safe storage regulations. They would be more likely to recognize the risks and responsibilities of firearm ownership, and because they are known to the authorities, they would be dissuaded from passing their legally owned firearms to the possession of an unauthorized individual. As a frontline officer, I use the registry on a daily basis. I've been successful and involved in the seizure of close to 1,600 firearms over the past year and a half. All these firearms were in the possession of persons who were unauthorized to possess them, and a portion of these firearms were seized from persons who had their firearms stored unsafely. These firearms included assault-style rifles and firearms that would be classified as non-restricted firearms or your long guns. The registry is useful and is a useful and necessary tool proving that licensing alone is not adequate. I have been involved in drafting public safety warrants where the registry was used to source information received in order to have the warrant authorized. Several firearms were removed from homes in order to prevent firearm violence. I've also been involved in the seizure of firearms from persons on various firearm prohibitions and license revocations as a result of mental health issues and criminal charges. A search of the registry was the only way of determining if there were any firearms associated to those persons. In the City of Toronto, long guns may not be the firearm of choice when it comes to front-page gang violence we read about. However, do not be misinformed. People in the City of Toronto may not be People in the City of Toronto may not all be dying as a result of gunshots from long guns, but they are definitely being victimized by criminals touting long guns as their firearm of choice. Over the past year and a half in the City of Toronto, hundreds of people have been victim to retail armed robberies where long guns have been used. Rifles and shotguns.
How much time do you have left? I mean, you're way over time.
45 seconds.
Okay, quickly.
Rifles and shotguns account for a portion of the crime firearms seized. Every sawed-off shotgun begins as a non-restricted firearm. While firearms may be used for legitimate purposes, including shotguns and rifles, they can be misused and often are. No matter what the reasons for their choice, it cannot be ignored that violent crime is being committed with long guns. And for that same exact reason, the registry exists for the restricted and prohibited firearms. It should exist for the non-restricted firearms. We currently have one national firearm registry, which is inclusive of all firearms. A barreled weapon can kill. A firearm, regardless of its class, is just that, a firearm. And until we can say for certain that long guns do not pose a threat to the community we serve, it is imperative that all classes of firearms be registered to licensed persons with no exceptions. I grew up in a hunting family and married into a sport shooting one. I understand the passion and am not opposed to legitimate firearm ownership, and I'm not looking to make criminals out of individuals who legally possess firearms. Every firearm owner has a legal responsibility to comply within the requirements as set out in the Firearms Act, ensuring that their firearms are properly licensed and stored securely against theft and misuse. The only way to ensure compliance is through enforcement. The criminal use of firearms is a serious concern. It has a devastating impact on the lives of victims, families, and communities across the country. Firearm-related incidents have become almost a daily occurrence. I'm grateful to have been provided the great training and tools to do my job effectively and protect the community that I serve. I'm thankful every day that I get to go home to my family. Police officers' safety and the safety of all Canadians will be compromised in the event the firearm registry ceases to include all firearm information associated to license holders. Please do not take away a valuable tool that I, as an active frontline police officer, use on a daily basis. Let's not open up the illicit firearm market to allow people to sell and or give their firearms to anyone, knowing the firearm will never be traced back to them. Thank you.
Okay. Next we have representing the government of the Yukon, the Honourable John Edzerza, Member of the Legislative Assembly and Minister of the Environment. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you for inviting me here to be here today. Mr. Chair and members of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security, it is an honor to be here today to speak as a witness before the committee in support of Bill C-391. It is my understanding that I am the first Aboriginal to come before this committee, which is very disappointing. Mr. Chair, there is a long history of opposition to the long gun registry in Yukon, indeed across the entire North, ever since the introduction of the registry in 1993 as set out in Bill C-68, an act respecting firearms and other weapons that was assented to in 1995. I want to read into the record a motion presented to the Yukon Legislative Assembly on December 14, 1994 by the late Johnny Abel, the former MLA for Buntakwichin. The motion read as follows, that it is the opinion of this House that the proposed amendments to the federal government's firearm legislation to be presented to the Parliament of Canada in February 1995 do not accommodate the needs of Northern Canadians and their lifestyle, and that the Yukon Legislative Assembly urges the Federal Minister of Justice, the Honourable Alan Rock, not to proceed with the proposed firearms amendments until such time as the needs of Northern Canadians are met. The motion passed unanimously. The words that Mr. Abel spoke at that time are still relevant today. He said, "The people in Toronto do not go ratting, nor do they need to hunt caribou like the people of Old Crow do. When they want food, they just go down to the nearest grocery store. The grocery store for the people of Old Crow is the land itself, our traditional territory, Old Crow Flats. To my constituents, a firearm is a tool. We need a rifle to hunt and live off the land. A carpenter needs tools such as a hammer and a saw to do his or her job. A mechanic needs tools such as wrenches and screwdrivers to do his or her job. My constituents are hunters. We need firearms to do our job. Mr. Chair, other motions have been presented in the Yukon Legislative Assembly over the years, opposing the long gun registry since MLA Johnny Abel's motion in 1994, but all to no avail. Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, Canada's entire north, are unified in their position, calling for the revocation of the long gun registry. As I speak here today, the three northern premiers are meeting in Whitehorse, and I am sure that the revocation of the long gun registry will be a topic for their discussion. Mr. Chair, I stand before you today to speak on behalf of Yukoners to ensure that the wasteful and ineffective long gun registry comes to an end. The registry forces law-abiding citizens to register their tools that are used in many cases fulfilling their everyday lives. The registry targets people who live off the land, First Nation citizens, ranchers, farmers, hunters, and outfitters, not the intended criminals. Registration is only for those who respect the law. People who plan to commit a crime using a weapon will not register the gun. The legislation that created the registry hoped to reduce violent crime. Usually handguns and other smuggled firearms are used in organized crime and drug deals, not hunting rifles. Domestic violence and violence against women is a problem in our society. Registering hunting rifles will not, unfortunately, change this dysfunction. Most violence against women is usually as a result of physical force. In Canada, most murders are committed by using a sharp-edged weapon. In 2008, a knife was used against 6% of all victims of violent crime. In comparison, 3% of violent crimes were committed with a blunt club or blunt instrument, and 2% with a firearm. Statistics Canada, Knives and Violent Crime in Canada, 2008. I'm here to talk to you today about life in Canada's north and how long guns are a part of everyday life for many Yukoners. In rural Yukon, carrying a rifle may be the only defense against attack from many predators. A rifle is a tool to be used to safeguard their lives, with rural citizens are going about supporting their families, prospecting, fishing, and gathering other food sources. To many Yukoners, a rifle is a means to feed their children, elders, in some cases, community. For some, registration and the cost involved with registration will cause hardship. These law-abiding citizens have used rifles safely for all of their lives. I would now like to share with you some experience that I know of long gun life in the Yukon Territory. Mr. Chair, I was raised and taught at a very young age the value of a rifle, regardless if it was a .22 caliber or 30-06. I was taught how to respect the gun and honor it. I shot rabbits and grouse at age 9 and shot my first moose at the age of 13. Mr. Chair, First Nations people have been under the thumb of federal governments for hundreds of years. Only First Nations, what other race of people live and are subject to and act like the Indian Act? We are guaranteed inherent rights to hunt and put food on the table to feed our families. Would one believe this registry system has diminished those rights? As a First Nation elder, I believe it will, and it has. It will be hard for First Nations persons to own a gun. I know of one elder in Teslin, Yukon, who had his rifle taken away, and it took 2 years of court cases for him to get it back, taken away because it wasn't registered. Unbelievable. What's next? Mr. Chair, this long gun registry even affects our traditional ceremonies in a negative way. For example, when someone passes away, we have a headstone potlatch 1 year after. In this ceremony, we give gifts to members of the opposite clan. The most honorable gift one could give at this ceremony was a rifle. We cannot and do not do this anymore, and it hurts our spirit. Just another law put on us to strip us of our pride. Mr. Chair and members of the Standing Committee, I must ask, Why does no one consult with First Nations on important issues such as this? Does anyone in Ottawa really know how much this affects First Nations people right across Canada? It's just another put down to us, almost like we aren't important and we have no voice in the matter. Speaking of voice, Mr. Chair, I also heard the Liberal leader in Ottawa say that all his members have to vote to save the gun registry. If this is the case, Mr. Chair, then not only the First Nations will lose their voice, but the majority of Yukon citizens will. We have only one voice in the House of Parliament, and he belongs to the Liberal Party. One has to question whatever happened to democracy. Mr. Chair, I would possibly talk for days on this topic, but time does not allow for me to do so. However, I will summarize in this way. A rifle to First Nations and other in the Yukon is one of the highest values, so valuable, in fact, that it is a necessity for living on the land, more precious than diamonds or gold. B, First Nations were not consulted on how this law would affect their Aboriginal rights and traditional ceremonies. C, we don't know how much money was spent to date on this law. We heard billions, and our only response was, we sure could have used this money to upgrade our homes. We feel this law was written for the big cities in the South, and no thought was given to those who live off the land. In First Nation families, guns are passed down to others through death. I was given one of my dad's rifles when he died. We are unable to do this anymore. In First Nations families, guns are our only vote in the Yukon is being jeopardized by a whip vote by the Liberals. I say this with respect for Larry, because I sincerely believe he would support his constituents and vote in favor of Bill C-391. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I thank you for your time today. I thank you for giving me a chance to be heard. It took a lot of courage to come here today because I don't know you and you are much more powerful than I, but I had to. A friend of mine said to me at a potluck ceremony 2 days ago, and I quote, "When you go to Ottawa, tell those people guns don't kill. It's a stupid bastard who points a loaded gun at someone and pulls the trigger." I respectfully ask all of you and members from every party to support Bill C-391, an act to amend the Criminal Code and the Firearms Act. I thank you very much. And Mr. Chair, I had documents to table, but they were not translated into French, so the committee members will receive them in a few days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate you coming. We'll now go over to the representative from the Abbotsford Police Department, Chief Constable Mr. Bob Rich. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. It's pretty cool to be a Canadian and to be part of how the democracy functions. I think that's a pretty wonderful opportunity in my life, so thanks for letting me be here today. I want to talk a little bit about the situation that I and my fellow police officers and my community finds itself in. Abbotsford is a city of 135,000 people, 210 police officers. We're 70 kilometers east of Vancouver. We're the first community that's not really a suburb of Vancouver, and we are situated in the middle of the Fraser Valley. Abbotsford is actually the biggest geographical city in British Columbia in that it's 140 square miles, much of which is active farming land. As part of the Lower Mainland, as far as this issue goes, in 2008 there were 58 murders in the Fraser Valley and the Lower Mainland, and in 2009 there were 56. Both of those years we were in the midst of active gang wars. And Abbotsford has found itself actually as the very center of those gang wars. What happened, I suppose, and I'm still trying to figure this out, but Vancouver successfully pushed some of its grow-ops out into the valley where the farmlands are better places to hide huge grow-ops in the outbuildings, and we ended up with hundreds of them, and young men grew up in this industry and made a lot of money in Abbotsford, and the gangs flourished. And I joined the Abbotsford Police Department as its chief 2 years ago, and I'm still trying to understand how this farming community ended up being the focal point that it is. But in 2008, and again, as soon as it gets declared by Stats Canada, Abbotsford is the murder capital of Canada. We count ourselves as having had 11 murders last year in a small community of 135,000 people. 2 of those aren't technically ours because they're 50 yards into, I should say meters, into a reserve that is actually policed by the RCMP. But they were 2 young boys from one of our high schools that were murdered, ages 18 and 17. They are our murders, and they are part of the 11. 8 of those murders are gang and drug-related murders. And so it's our #1 issue. I guess that's kind of a duh. But it's the thing that we are facing into. We've just created a gang squad. I've spent lots of my time in the schools talking to young people. We are doing all kinds of preventative things, but we are in trouble. We actually have just finished a count. We have 130 gang members living or working, doing their trade in the Abbotsford area that we have put on a list to go after. One of the things that happened, and you may have heard their name, but the Bacon brothers grew up and live in Abbotsford, and they were the heads of the Red Scorpion gang and became the gang that the other gangs wanted to kill. And so a lot of the violence ended up being on our turf, even though it was a larger battle. 90% of the guns used in shootings are either handguns or assault rifles, and they're brought illegally across the border from Washington. Abbotsford is one of those places that has a long unprotected border, lots of backpacking through the mountains, if you will, and across what we call Zero Avenue with cocaine and marijuana and handguns as the commodities that people trudge across with. And our problem is primarily in relation to those kinds of weapons. And so I want to bring that thought to this committee around what it is that we're really facing as at least our part of Canada. This is a dynamic problem. It's a growing problem. It's not a static situation. And my belief is what's going on with guns in Canada is a reason why this gang war has been so very violent. I grew up in policing, and my wife never worried about me as a police officer. My young son is a police officer in Vancouver, and she asks me almost every other week, is my son safe? And I don't have a great answer to that question anymore because he's encountering far more handguns than I ever did. What can be done? With the greatest of respect, I understand the focus around the long gun issue, and I will talk about that in a moment. But I believe we need to actually step back and develop a comprehensive program around all gun control issues in Canada. I think it's time to have a look at what's going on. I think we're in trouble. It has a lot to do with our American neighbors. It has a lot to do with the drug issues that we struggle with. I take the view that we have taken the wrong approach to handguns. I have a handgun that I wear. It is only designed for one purpose, and that is to shoot another human being. I do not believe any person should have that gun who is not essentially required to use such a device in their profession to protect the public. And I believe it should be prohibited in all cases. I don't think this target shooting idea of private holders of handguns I think Canada's taken the wrong approach. Assault rifles should never be in the hands of any private person. There's just no reason for that. If we want to create special systems for them to be in gun ranges, that's fine, but I don't think they should be in any private person's homes ever. I believe we should be working on simplified powers for police in order to be more effective in our search and seizure. Both the warrant powers that exist under the criminal code, which are overly complex, compare us to any other developed nation. Our warrant powers are unbelievably complex in all areas, and for warrantless search powers as well. I am concerned about domestic violence. It is a huge issue. It's one of the 6 priorities we have in our community. It's something we are focused on. It's a real problem. And one of the things I think we should be doing about that is doing a much better job around who holds a purchasing and acquisition license. We should be doing way more. I have a friend who wanted a PAL. I got a phone call as part of his background screening and was asked horrible, closed-ended questions by this clerk on the other end of the phone about whether this person should or should not have a PAL. The kind of questions that if one of my interrogators ever asked, I would want them fired. because they simply said, is this person prone to violence? Will he kill people if he has a gun? And of course I knew what the right answers I was supposed to give in order for my friend to get a license. That's not how you conduct an interview. That's not how you find out what the issues are with somebody. Let's invest more money and expertise into who has one of these PALs. Let's do way more open source checking on the internet with social networks. Let's put more money into that part of the system, please. I also believe that Canada needs to invest in. It was interesting to hear the detective from Toronto talk about the great work that's done in Toronto around gun control and investigatively going out after guns. Occurred after a young girl was murdered. It was when that great investment started to take place in Toronto, and I would love to have that money invested in British Columbia and the rest of Canada without a horrific incident like that to spark it. So I see a need for that. We are being inundated with American high-quality firearms, and we're not being able to stop it, and it's difficult. I know we have an open border, but we need to do something about that and go after it from an investigative perspective. We have 909,000 registered guns in British Columbia. 76,000 of those are possessed by people with lapsed PALs. We aren't going after the system that's designed to look after this. Why is that? I believe the registry exists for the right reasons, but there's two significant issues with the registry. One, it's my firm belief that the registry is horrifically inaccurate. I talk to my investigators, I talk to my gun expert, and story after story, whenever they've tried to use it, the information in it is wrong. And our people in my province, I believe the reason that we haven't gone after these people with lapsed PALs, when we went out to do it, we found that the information about even which ones were lapsed and what guns existed at that residence were wrong. That's a problem. I have no confidence in the current system. I also believe, talking to my own experts, and this is one of those tough ones, like how many grow-ops exist in Abbotsford right now, but I believe there's well over 1 million guns easily in Canada, that are long guns, that aren't registered in any way, shape, or form. The system has not been successful. So I find my investigators actually don't rely on this. They are obligated to check the system when there's a domestic violence situation, because we should use everything we've got. But I think a flawed system is worse than any system. If we can't fix it, with the greatest of respect, the long gun registry should be scrapped. The other thing I'll say, and I wouldn't have necessarily known this before it happened, but the use of criminal law to ensure compliance has utterly failed. And we now have literally hundreds of thousands of Canadians who are committing a criminal offense because they have neither registered the weapon or they have lapsed PALs. And that's a horrific way to undermine a very important system in our country. And so we need, if we're going to continue, we need to change that system as well. So my real point is this. On the issue of long gun registry, as one part of a whole system of dealing with this gun control problem, which we really do have, we only ought to retain this registry if we can fix it. We've had it for a long time, but if we're not going to ensure that we have an accurate gun registry in this country, long gun registry, I don't believe it should be part of our arsenal to deal with this issue. I would only rely on CPIC if I believed that it worked. I would only rely on this registry if I believed it worked. Thank you.
Boy, right on 10 minutes. Thank you. We will now go to Mr. Rahali from the Dawson College Committee for Gun Control. Welcome to our committee, sir. Go ahead and give us your presentation.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come here and represent the Dawson College for Gun Control. Our committee was formed within a few days after the attack that took place at Dawson College on September the 13th, 2006. Before I get into that, though, I would like to just say something to the honourable member sitting just beside Chief Bob Rich, and I listened to his comments about the concerns that he has as a representative of the Indigenous people in the North, and I have a lot of sympathy for what he explained to everyone today. I will say, though, I find it indicative, what he said, of the sense of victimization that the northern peoples have, that the hunters and the farmers have. This sense of victimization, I think, if we really take a good look at it, it's something that has been encouraged a lot by government spokesmen. They've been repeating time and time again about the wasted money, about the billions of dollars And he just said himself, billions of dollars. Yet the registry has been examined by the Auditor General and by other people. Yes, there was extraordinary costs when the registry was put together. That's a problem that we should leave to others to dig into the history and find out, perhaps who to blame. But however, the system exists now. If the system has some fault, fault in how it's been put together, in the financing, it certainly doesn't have enough. The comments made by Chief Bob Rich, he says he can't support it if it can't be fixed. Certainly the system can be fixed. It's just like, we put together an incredible house, went way over budget. But who in their right mind would say, well, the house is not functioning properly, the plumbing is wrong, the electronics aren't very good, there's a leak in the roof, so let's get rid of the house. I mean, who would use that kind of logic? I'm very sad to hear this talk about victimization. If the registry is that difficult, then something has to be changed in the registry. I know I have a colleague at work who told me that it took him months and months to get one of his rifles registered. That's a difficulty. I hope that the government is not starving the registry of enough finances and personnel so that people will continue to feel like they're being victimized. Now, if I might speak about Dawson College. In 2006, many of you know, this very terrible incident took place. I was there that day, and I got to take a look at some of these faces that you can see in this photograph. Dawson College has about 7,500 daytime students. Faculty and staff, students fled the building. Gunshots were heard. Police arrived. Guns are being waved everywhere. The look of these faces. This is a terrible thing to see in the face of people who are kids. This is something that should never happen. Very, very tragic day. 19 people were injured. Unfortunately, one of them died. I know the parents of the girl who's in this casket. And if you could have met them and see their faces, as I'm sure many of the professionals on this board have seen, these are faces you don't want to see. They're the faces that it's beyond words, the despair, the anguish, the living nightmare. Yet these people supported our committee, became members of our committee, and were active, and came to Ottawa in November of 2006 to participate at a national press conference. Why did they come? The registry did not prevent the death of their daughter, but the violence that ensued that day and their loss made them realize how important it is that Canadians have a reduced risk of being the victim of gun violence. This is what's important. 3 days after this incident, the Prime Minister on CBC radio said that, well, the gun registry didn't stop the attack at Dawson College. I'm sorry. It's a ridiculous statement to make. I cannot believe that this Prime Minister could have said such a thing. And when I heard him say it, I, with students and faculty, put together our committee. We looked into the problem of gun control in Canada. We listened to people who had something to say about it, professionals, and I contacted the former head of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. I contacted firearms registers, chief firearms officers. I mean, all of these people that are sitting here that have some incredible amount of experience in this field, they're not saying get rid of the registry. I think Chief Bob Rich is not saying get rid of the registry. He's saying fix it or get rid of it. I mean, it's overwhelming to think that a government would consider doing this, a regulation of weapons. 8 million weapons in Canada that have paperwork. Let's get rid of it. Deregulation. Deregulation. We all know what has happened with deregulation in recent years. The financial meltdown of the United States, deregulation. The big oil spill in the Gulf, deregulation. And now we're talking about deregulating firearms. These are not garden tools. These are not a mechanic's tools. These are weapons designed to fire a projectile at a high speed at a target. Many of them are meant to kill people, like this one. This is a Beretta CX Storm. It is the firearm that was used to wreak havoc at Dawson College. When Stockwell Day, the Minister for Public Security, came to Dawson College, he told our committee that this gun has no business being in the hands of civilians. That was in 2006. We asked the minister, what about putting this gun on the prohibitive list? He said he'd check it out. That's 4 years ago. It's not on the list. Neither is the Mini Ruger that was used in the assassination at Polytechnique. I think the government has shown a great deal of irresponsibility in dealing with gun control in Canada. One of the things that happened shortly after my meeting with Stockwell Day, he sent me a letter because I asked him some information. He sent me a letter. In the very first paragraph, he mentioned Gary Mauser. Gary Mauser is the gray eminence behind the Conservative move to scrap the registry. This is Gary Mauser. Gary Mauser is a professor. He does a lot of research into guns. A lot of his research, Stockwell Day, he sent it to me. He sent me the research written by this man. This is not the man that should be deciding conservative policy on the registry of long guns in Canada. The same man, this man here, wants Canadians to have the right to carry concealed weapons, just like they do in the United States. Is that what Canadians want? If we get rid of the registry, maybe that's next. Maybe that'll be another conservative policy. Maybe citizens who are qualified should be able to carry a concealed weapon on them. I have a last picture here. This some people refer to as a little bit of paradise. It's Honolulu, Hawaii. Why am I bringing this picture here? Curiously enough, it is one of the states in the United States that has a very admirable record on gun control. They have a very low rate of gun violence and homicides where a firearm is implicated in all of the United States. In Hawaii, you have to register all guns, rifles and shotguns. That's something. But you know, even in Hawaii, their record is not as good as Canada. So here we have a pretty good system. It's not too bad. The registry is not the best part of the system. It's only a small part, but it's a small part that's necessary. Everything has to be included. I encourage the government to let this thing go. It's just too much.
Sure. Last of all, but not least, we have from the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians, Mr. Alan Drummond and Ms. Carolyn Snyder. Which one of you is going to do the presentation?
It'll be me, sir.
Okay, thank you.
On behalf of the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians, I'd like to thank you and the committee for inviting us and allowing us to bring what we think is a different perspective to this debate. By way of introduction, Dr. Carolyn Snyder to my right is a emergency physician trauma team leader at St. Mike's in Toronto and a researcher in injury prevention. We probably represent a bit of a dichotomy with respect to emergency services. I'm a rural family physician that runs a small town emergency department. I don't think Carolyn owns guns, but I do. So it'll be an interesting sort of 1-2, I think, in terms of how we view emergency medicine and gun control in Canada. CAPE is the National Specialty Society for Emergency Medicine. It represents in excess of 1,800 physicians nationwide, with an interest or a practice in emergency medicine. We have evolved as a specialty since our recognition 3 decades ago. Initially, we focused solely on the evaluation of the acutely ill or injured, but increasingly we've been placing increasing emphasis on such things as system design, research, and injury prevention. And injury continues to be a major issue for our association, but underlying this persistent concern is the realization that our collective ability as healthcare providers in the economy that we're in, our ability to treat an injury has largely been maximized, and therefore prevention assumes greater importance for us. Our membership continues to have concerns with respect to firearm-related injury and death, even since our initial support for Bill C-68 back in 1994-1995, and they have insisted that their professional association that we represent vigorously supports efforts to reduce the tragic human toll associated with firearm misuse. We have been leaders in the call for mandatory reporting of gunshot wounds in Canada and continue to vigorously support the provisions of the gun control bill as a sensible package of regulations to minimize the risk of gun-related injury and death in Canada. Injury is a major public health issue. It is the leading cause of death amongst people between 1 and 44 years of age, and most deaths from injuries occur before we ever have an opportunity to intervene. They occur in the home and on the roadside. There's a large economic burden to injury as well, not just from the direct medical costs, but also the cost of rehabilitation, human tolls of suffering. Canada's emergency physicians and nurses, as well as trauma surgeons, have been active in promoting an awareness amongst legislators with respect to their role in injury prevention. We believe strongly that these educational efforts, coupled with socially conscious legislation, leads to positive societal change, injuries prevented, and lives saved. We urge you to consider the provisions of the Firearms Act as it now stands, not as elements of a crime control bill, but rather, more importantly, as key elements of a socially responsible public health and safety bill. There has been a reduction in firearm-related mortality in Canada since the introduction of firearms regulations both in 1991 and 1995, and we see actually no compelling reason, none whatsoever actually, from a public health perspective to dramatically alter such effective legislation. You have our brief in front of you with our background paper. I think we're all familiar with the level of gun ownership in Canada. It's important to realize that rural areas have high rates of gun ownership, and more particularly, rural areas, including the territories and in the communities in the north, are overrepresented with respect to firearm-related deaths, usually by the long gun. For instance, in the province of Ontario in 2004-2005, the rate per 100,000 of emergency visits resulting from firearm injury in northern communities was 8.7 per 100,000, contrasted considerably higher than the provincial average of 5.3 per 100,000 in more southern Ontario. Firearms are an important cause of injury and death in Canada. In 2005, there were 818 Canadians who were killed by the use of firearms, and despite a general media focus on crime, 72% of these firearm-related injuries were caused by, in fact, suicide. So for us, this is largely a suicide prevention issue. Despite the impressive reductions in mortality associated with the provisions of the Firearms Act, as will be discussed briefly, there remains much to be done to reduce this tragic societal toll and unacceptable financial waste. This is not the time, in our view, to consider reduced efforts at better gun control. With respect to suicide, suicide is the second most common cause of death in Canada. I may be speaking fast. If I am, you can slow me down. Okay? I want to get to questions. Suicide is the second most common cause of death in Canada for those aged 10 to 34, the flower of our youth, and the ninth leading cause of death overall. In 2005, firearm deaths associated with 15% of all suicides, 15%. And as previously mentioned, 72% of all firearm-related deaths are, in fact, associated with suicide. The majority of suicides are not, in fact, premeditated acts, but are rather impulsive in nature. Access to firearms facilitates the completion of a suicidal attempt. If you put a gun to your head and pull the trigger, you stand at about a 96% chance of dying. If you take an overdose of medications, that is substantially reduced, less than 5%. So suicide attempts using guns are particularly lethal. And we have noticed in our review of the literature, which led to the Cape gun control position, that in fact firearm-related suicides in Canada have decreased by 46% since the introduction of Kilcampbell's bill in 1991, and by 35% since the introduction of the Firearms Act in 1995. So we believe that there has been some strong evidence that in fact gun control in Canada in its various forms has led to a cumulative expression of reduced suicides by firearms in Canada. With respect to intimate partner homicide, I'm just going to skip a little bit. A gun in a home is a recognized risk factor for spousal homicide. And we know that the spousal homicide rate is 5 times higher against women than men. Rifles and shotguns were used in 62% of these homicidal acts. And we also note that firearm use in spousal homicide has decreased by 36% since the passage of the Firearms Act, from 25 victims in 1995 down to 9 in 2008. We know nothing about crime control. We'll defer to our friends from various police associations, but we do note with interest that with respect to homicides, despite the fact of increased gang violence in Toronto, and I can't believe I'm actually saying Abbotsford, but I guess I am, that in fact the homicide rate by firearm in Canadian society has reduced by a significant percentage since the introduction of Bill C-68. I'm going to skip unintentional injury, and I'm going to skip the paradigms of injury prevention. Suffice to say that we believe that the legislators of our country have a role to play in public health bills. Am I doing okay for time? That's all I need. So the question is, what is the respect of the role of the registry? Because it's not a philosophical thing for us, it's a practical matter. We, as emergency physicians, be in rural Perth or in downtown Toronto, commonly encounter people who are brought to the emergency department with an ideation or threat of suicide. They are commonly brought by the police. It's a tough call to decide, who is at risk for suicide and who isn't. It really is a tough act, and there's a lot of heavy clinical weight on our responsibility. We don't want to be wrong. It is very comforting for us to know if there's a gun in the home in terms of assessing degree of risk for the lethality of the method. So using the police force to reassure us that a gun in the home may have been removed makes it a little easier call for us if we're thinking about release. Similarly, with respect to domestic partner violence, women are brought to our emergency departments often with the police, and again, the issue is, how safe is this person? Should we return them back to their homes? And police access to the registry with knowledge of whether guns are registered to the homeowner is in fact an important point. So it has practical concerns for us. It's not a philosophical discussion. Our association is very clear, has been very clear for the last 10 years, 15 years, unwavering in its support for effective gun control, and more particularly unwavering in its support for Bill C-68. It's hard to tease out the various provisions of that bill in terms of what's had the positive effect. The cumulative expression has been positive. We urge you not to repeal the registration. We believe it, in fact, is an important tool to ensure the public health and safety of all Canadians. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now go to questions and comments, and we'll begin with Mr. Holland from the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for appearing today. Mr. Momi, if I could start with you first, thank you very much for your work, and through you to the more than 41,000 officers that you represent. Thank you for their service to the community and country. One of the things that I think committee's been wrestling with, and we heard from 3 very decent retired detectives who were from Winnipeg, and one of the things that those who are opposed to the registry try to paint is that there's a great division in the policing community. And I'm wondering if, as representing the policing community, specifically police officers, if you can address whether or not you think the positions of those, and with any position you have some people who agree and disagree, but there's a legitimate question as to whether or not that's an outlier in terms of a position or whether or not the policing community is divided.
Well, I'll speak specifically to our membership. We have across Canada approximately 75,000 police officers. That includes the RCMP, and as you know, Mr. Holland, we represent a very small group of those members of the RCMP. But I would say that overall, and we do have, and I have been very open and blunt about this particular issue, we have small pockets of, certainly of members of the Canadian Police Association that have varying views on this particular issue. Now, when I say different pockets, we represent approximately 156 member associations across this country. It comes to no surprise to any of you around this table that the Saskatchewan Federation of Police Officers has been open in regards to its reservations about this piece of legislation. Now, what I do want to say, though, is just recently in Ottawa, when we, in fact, were on the Hill lobbying government a couple of weeks ago, we have heard from different experts in regards to the gun registry and what it does, what it doesn't do, more factual information when it comes to the gun registry. And what I can tell you is that at the end of this particular month, the Saskatchewan Federation of Police Officers is at their annual general meeting in Estevan, Saskatchewan, which I will be attending, and they will be reconsidering as a result of new information that's come out in the last several months, but more in particular in the last several years, because the gun registry has significantly changed in this country in the last few years since the RCMP has taken over the actual management of the Canadian Firearms Program. So in saying that, clearly I will state right here, right now, Saskatchewan Federation of Police Officers today is of opposing views than the Canadian Police Association as a whole.
So I'm really tight on time, so maybe I'll just run through a few questions. We can be brief in answers. So of the 150 plus associations, there's one association that is currently opposed, and they're reconsidering their position, correct?
One association that represents six smaller associations
right.
in Saskatchewan.
Right. Could I then to Detective Constable Tiff, if you could, you said in your presentation that domestically sourced firearms are a problem. Can you expand on that? How big an issue are guns coming from domestic sources that end up in the hands of criminals?
Speaking for Toronto, in Toronto for the last 3 years, all our crime guns, like all firearms, the statistics show that 50% of those guns were domestically sourced. Domestically sourced usually means the majority of those guns that are domestically sourced are from residential entries, not necessarily from Toronto, but residential entries across Canada. Those guns have been sourced back to Canada. And it is a problem. It's 50%, give or take 3% over the last 3 years. So it has remained consistent, 50%. So the registry is assisting with regards to enforcement to ensure compliance.
Mr. Rich, if I could, you've heard from the Canadian Police Association, you've heard from the Detective Constable, the Canadian Chiefs of Police, I'm sure you've heard their position in saying this is an important tool, one of many, but it's an extremely important tool in public safety. Given that the Auditor General has told us and the RCMP has said this program costs $4.1 million a year, given that so many, such an overwhelming preponderance of your colleagues, in fact, of the Chiefs of Police of over 430, you're one of 3, I believe, that has come out against the registry. Would you then not agree that if so many people think it's so vital to do their job and it costs $4.1 million a year, that we should be focusing on your comments to try to make the system better? Do you favor scrapping the system or fixing it? Can you clarify that for me?
Sure. I always struggle a bit with the way we say all the police are supporting it. I sent an email to my colleagues in the province and got some quiet emails back from some RCMP leaders that wouldn't want their comments repeated about their concerns with the registry. So people in my world are asked to line up as well. And there is, at various levels, people struggling with their support of it.
But if I could, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm tight on time.
Sorry.
Can I just ask you, do you favor scrapping it or do you favor fixing it? And I just quick question because I have to go on. If the overwhelming number of people who represent these associations at the very least say that they need it, for $4.1 million, does it make sense to scrap it, or should we be focusing instead of your comments about the need to improve it?
Okay. You won't fix it for $4.1 million. So yes, I'm in favor of Canadians trying to fix it before we scrap it, but it's going to cost more than that.
Okay. If I could, to Mr. Drummond, I'm going to quote you. You said, as a rural emergency physician, this is something you said recently, and coroner, I can safely say that I've never seen a handgun injury. I have seen, however, my share of injuries and deaths inflicted by rifles and shotguns. Gun-related injury is not just a Toronto problem that involves gangs. It occurs in my small, idyllic rural community and involves people that would otherwise seem quite normal. Registration of firearms is important to ensure accountability and compliance with safe storage. Can you expand on that, and can you say, as somebody coming from a rural community, do you, Dr. Drummond, also yourself have a firearms license?
Yes, I actually do. I have a 22 and a 12-gauge shotgun that is largely used. I live on about 12 acres on the water, and it's largely used for critter control, although their critters have nothing to fear from me. And my son's a bow hunter, so that's not really an issue. But I can tell you that I originally grew up in Montreal, spent time in Vancouver, was in the Canadian Army, and actually saw far more firearm-related injuries in my life in agricultural Perth over the years. Certainly, shotguns and rifles were, in fact, not the predominant weapon. They were the weapon. I've never actually seen a handgun injury in my 30 years in medicine.
We'll now go on to Ms. Morani, please.
Merci à tous d'être présents.
Thank you to all our witnesses for your attendance here. Mr. Rahilly, I want to thank you for your presentation. It is so real and down to earth. I thank you for that. My question is for Mr. Rich, though. Mr. Rich, in listening to what you're saying, and perhaps I may be mistaken, you'll tell me if I am, you want an improvement in the registry. You say it'll cost more, but you'd like to see it improved. You don't seem to want to throw it out, scrap it. You think that we could improve it. You also referred to decriminalization of honest citizens and hunters. You say that there's an increasing number of people that are considered criminals because they haven't registered their firearms. You're referring to 1 million people who carry unregistered long guns. I have a few questions for you. Since when would you say this figure of 1 million people, would you say it was before 2006, since 2006, before or after the amnesty?
It's one of those figures that people can pull out of the air and nobody can ever, I suppose, criticize. But when I asked my own experts how many long guns they believe exist today across Canada that are not registered, they said very conservatively 1 million long guns. That's what they believe currently exists in Canada.
Mais est-ce que c'est avant l'amnistie?
Before the amnesty, though? Was it before the amnesty, or has it been in existence for a long time then? Now?
I mean now. They continue to not being registered.
En 2004, est-ce que vous avez les chiffres?
In 2004, do you have the figures for 2004, 2005, 2003? No? Could you provide them to the committee?
Because, like I said in my comment, this is like estimating how many grow-ops you have in your community. You really are only guessing, and I'm not trying to say that my statement about 1 million is anything more than an estimate.
Okay, je comprends.
I understand. All right. So it's sort of what you're saying. It's a figure that comes out of the air, essentially, that pulled out of a hat. Is that the right translation? Did I understand you correctly?
Drawn from a person who has a tremendous amount of understanding about guns in Canada, and it's as good a guess as anybody else's.
C'est-tu le monsieur que Monsieur Riley nous a montré en photo?
Is it the gentleman that Mr. Riley was showing us in the picture? Is it that man that was in the photo that pulled that figure from a hat? I saw that he had a seriously long gun there.
Yeah, no, I'm asking my own experts, not that professor. Thank you.
D'accord.
All right. So you were referring to decriminalization, Mr. Rich, am I right? You talked about decriminalization, and I would tell you, listen, it's been a while now that I've been hearing before this committee, that I've been hearing this word. I've been trying to understand what people mean by decriminalization, and I still have yet to understand. Because if I look at the June 15th, 2000 decision from the Supreme Court of Canada, the court ruled that you cannot divide firearms into two categories, those that are considered lethal or dangerous and those that are not. All firearms are susceptible to being used for criminal purposes. They could all kill or mutilate. All firearms are therefore a threat to public safety, and in this regard, their control is a matter of criminal jurisdiction, federal jurisdiction. If we want to decriminalize, then Section 9192 no longer exists. In other words, registering or not registering a weapon intentionally or not intentionally is not a crime. But then nothing would be a crime, and it would be up to the provinces to manage this. Am I mistaken here?
The Canadian, well, I actually did go to law school, but that was 30 years ago. So you're asking a lot of me. In the province, for example, I know you know this, but obviously we run registration systems for cars and for driver's licenses. It's not a criminal system. The federal government can run registration systems that use law other than criminal law. You can have regulatory powers for, we have laws for catching lobsters inappropriately that are regulatory from the federal government. So the federal government could, when it came to the issue of registration, use non-criminal regulatory laws. Or, and I'm not an expert on this, I suspect still that the province could handle registration for firearms as opposed to the criminalization of possession for them.
But the fact that a person registers a weapon, perhaps Mr. Momi could help us in this regard. The idea of registering a car is a provincial area jurisdiction, not federal. So when we say we want to decriminalize the registration of it, then you'd be delegating this authority to the provinces. If it is criminalized, then it falls under the criminal code provisions like 9290, 9192, and I just don't understand how we could decriminalize without it becoming provincial regulations. I don't know if you can answer that, Mr. Momi.
There's 1 minute left.
Je pense que vous êtes d'accord.
I think that you're right. It would have to become a provincial issue, and it would have to be managed on the provincial side and dealt with. It would have to be out of the federal government's, the federal hands, and we are completely against that. Okay, so then, if I'm understanding correctly, to decriminalize the entire offense of registering or not registering one's firearm intentionally or non-intentionally would be decriminalized. That would mean deregulating and essentially telling the provinces, manage this yourselves. Otherwise, it remains a crime. Absolutely. Thank you. I understand now. Thank you.
Mr. Comartin's not here, and he's made an agreement with Mr. Rezhnevsky to allow him to do it. So go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for appearing. Mr. Moni, we've heard you represent 156 police associations, some 75,000 member police officers, and we also heard you reference the usage that your rank-and-file officers make of the gun registry. 92% use it, 65% day-to-day, 73% in response to calls. So it seems to show tremendous usage. But I've also got some other numbers here that show that not only is the percentage of usage and the take-up significant, since 2004, the number of queries have increased from 2,087 to last year 11,085. That's an over 531% increase in usage over a period of 5 years. Now, if the registry was not doing its job, wouldn't the usage decrease? I just find it hard to kind of follow the logic here. We have increase in usage, we have high percentage of usage. That seems to indicate that police officers use it because it's working.
Well, in regards to the reference material that I provided and the statistical information that I provided, in 2007, the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program were the ones that instituted a survey of our members across this country. So that is one. Some of the information that you're highlighting comes from, and a significant portion of that comes from the RCMP itself. All of the data that we have requested, for the most part, comes from the Canadian Firearms Program, from the RCMP itself. And what I can say is this, and I agree with you, we have seen a significant increase in usage of the gun registry itself, which is, again, just one component of the Canadian Firearms Program. My take on that is that we have seen a significant change in the way that the Canadian Firearms Program is being managed. We all know that it was taken over, I believe, by the RCMP in 2006, 2007, and you have seen significant increases in those particular years by frontline members. Again, as I indicated, I won't dispute the fact that there is auto links that are connected to police computers across this country, specifically in Toronto and BC, that we know of. But again, even if we take those 50%. Numbers out, it's still 50%.
Great, thank you. So it seems there's a high take-up amongst police officers, 92%. They use it often and in increasing rates. So it seems to indicate that it is a useful police tool. In fact, you gave us examples of some of Canada's worst-known crimes, Mayerthorpe, where we lost 4 of our officers, that it helped in the solving of that particular crime. Do you personally believe that this registry has saved the lives of frontline police officers?
Tough question to answer, and I'll tell you why. I'll go to what Dr. Drummond was talking about in regards to the registry, and it would take me quite a few minutes to explain that in regards to saving a life. Can I point to one incident to say that the registry has saved the life of this particular individual? No, I can't say that. But what I can say is when we come... I was
talking more about your gut feeling, because of course it's difficult to lay out empirical evidence that would say, yes, this, it's not the nature of the tool.
Right. Well, my own police experience and my own gut feeling, certainly there are many cases, if we were to start digging through all of them, where it saved people's lives, and more specifically in the areas that Dr. Drummond speaks of in regards to suicides.
Thank you. I'd like to address another issue. We heard reference to 3 retired police officers from the Winnipeg Police Force, and one in particular, Mr. Tinsley, made some allegations that I found quite disturbing. So before I address those, your police associations, are they democratically elected? Are you democratically elected?
They are. Each of the 156 associations are their presidents, their executives.
So these aren't appointed positions, these are elected positions. So you represent the rank and file officers.
Correct.
Because we heard allegations, and some of the quotations were that the police have been effectively silenced, meaning your rank and file members have been effectively silenced. That's one quote. That police officers have been intimidated, and the words were not to attend. So I find a strange disconnect when you hear these conspiracy theories being propagated, that's not really the view. We hear that 150 of 156 police associations of democratically elected representatives of rank and file police say, we support this. And then, of course, there'll be people of different views, but then we hear them...
You have less than a minute.
Report that, well, it's a conspiracy. There's a conspiracy theory. But since I have little time left, I'd like to go to Mr. Rahili. If we could once again see the weapon that was used at Dawson College, and you drew a parallel to the weapon that was used at École Polytechnique, the Ruger Mini 14. It was a weapon that in less than 30 minutes killed 14 women, injured another 13 women. Is it correct or is it not correct that without the gun registry, that means that weapon the Ruger Mini 14 would no longer be registered in Canada?
No. Well, if the registry is gone, no. I'm sorry. Just to be clear about it, this
The long gun registry.
this
Yep.
the
Ruger.
restricted weapon is it's in fact the people to my right could answer that question better than I can.
We're going to have to end it there.
There are
We're way over time.
semi-automatic rifles. Yes, they would be wiped off the record.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Similar to
Radford,
these.
please.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the witnesses for your appearance here today. It's good to see you again, Mr. Momey, and I have a number of questions for you. Chief Rich testified that he believes the gun registry to be horrifically inaccurate. And bearing in mind there's been an amnesty since 2006, would you agree with Chief Rich on that point?
I would not, and the only reason, Mr. Rothberger, that I would say not is, again, from the information that we see, in fact, in the annual report provided by the Canadian Firearms Program last year, produced by the RCMP, in regards to the consistent use. You would think that if it's so inundated with problems
I'm very short on time here. There's amnesty for registration, so you accept the proposition that many owners do not register their rifles.
Absolutely.
So therefore, you'll have to agree with the chief that the registry is not accurate. People aren't registering.
With the continued amnesties that have been occurring, absolutely, there's many.
So you agree that the registry is not accurate currently, today?
With the continued amnesties?
Thank you. So in 2004, your association had a resolution that passed and said the Canadian Professional Police Association supports a firearm registry system that provides accurate information on all firearms and is accessible to police officers in a timely manner to improve the safety of all police officers and community members in Canada. So that resolution is no longer valid. You just told me you don't believe the registry is accurate.
Well, in fact, in that document, you'll also notice that we continue to improve the firearms program or the firearms registry.
Right.
Again, as I indicated, the continued amnesties are certainly not assisting in the registration of firearms.
Certainly the 2004 resolution didn't contemplate an inaccurate registry.
Well, it contemplated certainly problems in any type of registry.
Okay, I'm going to change gears slightly. You talked about a survey, and Mr. Wachowski talked about it at some length, and he said something that I think you need to correct. He said you represent 75,000 members, and your brief indicates that you represent 41,000 members.
Yeah, and when I mentioned 75,000, I talked about all frontline police officers across this country, which included the RCMP.
Sure.
But
so
for us, it's only 41,000.
You have 41,000 members in your association.
Correct.
And I understand only 408 responded to that survey. You said that.
Well, yes. This survey was actually compiled by the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program Canadian Firearms Program in 2007.
Okay, so you appreciate that that's less than 1% of your members responded to that survey.
But we all know, again, how surveys work. But, yeah, it's a small...
This isn't a random survey. This is a survey where every member has the opportunity to respond.
Correct.
But 99+% choose not to. Correct? 408 responded. You have 41,000 members.
Yeah, no, I don't. And again, I can't explain how the actual survey was provided because we weren't involved. The Canadian Police Association was not involved in this particular survey. It was a survey that was compiled by the RCMP in 2007. So it had nothing to do with us.
But nonetheless, 92% of less than 1% have used the registry based on your own survey.
But this is not our survey.
Based on the survey that you presented in your opening statement.
Right.
Thank you. Okay, I want to talk about these 11,000 inquiries a day, and I appreciate, and I think you're right, that 55% of them are automatically generated by CPIC, or sorry, 45%. But I want to talk about the other 55%, which you indicated are normally in response to a domestic situation. Those are the ones I want to talk about. So here's my scenario. Your officers are responding to a domestic situation. You run a search, and it comes back that there are no weapons at that residence. Are you telling me that your officers or the members of your association rely on that search and go into that house thinking that there are no weapons?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. Second scenario, they run the same search. They search either by name or by residence, it doesn't matter. The registry comes back that there's one weapon. Your officers go in, they neutralize the weapon, they take it out of play. At that point, do they assume that they have a safe crime scene, or are they operating under the assumption that there might be more weapons?
You always assume that there's more weapons.
Okay, so you've given me two answers, and I agree with them both. Now, you did two searches. One's positive, one's negative. Your officers didn't rely on either one.
Pardon me?
Your officers did not rely on either one of their registry searches. In both situations, they did not rely on that information. Is that correct?
Well, the reality is when you attend as a police officer a residence and you have access to the registry and you attend a residence that has one weapon or 15 weapons or 30 weapons, makes a significant difference.
No, I understand that. But my question was, in my two situations, they didn't rely on the registry either time, did they? Would they?
No, they weren't.
Thank you. Now, I was visited by three of your members, very fine officers from Edmonton 2 weeks ago, during Police Association Day on the Hill, and they had three things on their mind. They wanted to talk about a bargaining unit for the RCMP.
Correct.
They wanted to talk about more money for frontline policing, and they wanted to talk about a fund for the families of fallen brethren.
Correct.
If this is such a burning issue for the CPA, why was that not on the agenda of what they were dispatched to talk to me about?
Well, the gun registry issue is one of the issues, one of the many issues that we have as one of our priorities. And
not in the top three?
They were not one of the top three.
Okay. And in fact, you did a survey in 2010. You surveyed your members. You do that every year, right?
No.
Your website talks about a 2010 membership survey. You're not familiar with that?
Yes, okay.
And you'll agree with me, there are no questions about the long gun registry on that survey.
It wasn't a survey dealing with our priorities.
What was it a survey of? You asked your members their thoughts about the Young Offender Act. You asked about parole and penalties, but not long gun control, not firearm control?
Yeah, no, it was, and that survey basically came from last year's strategic planning sessions, which didn't
30
include...
seconds.
So, since you didn't survey them this year, and it wasn't even your survey in 2004, how can you tell this committee that you represent the opinions of 41,000 frontline officers?
Well, we have 29 board members across the board table, and those police officers, active police officers, are all representing different groups from right across Canada, from Vancouver to Winnipeg to Toronto to Halifax.
So you represent the opinions of the presidents of the associations, not of the frontline members?
Well, they in turn, and I believe it was a question from Mr. Holland earlier, is that those presidents are elected by their members at large.
But did any of them survey their members, except Saskatchewan?
That's not my business to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kenya, please.
And, the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians opposes 391, supports the gun registry. Your organization is just one of many medical and health organizations that also oppose it. Can you tell me what other organizations oppose it?
Sure, fair enough. Well, there was a broad group of health professionals that presented, as you know, last week an open letter to members of Parliament in support of the gun registry that included 28 medical and nursing associations, as well as some fairly preeminent health professionals. We're frontline workers. We see this stuff. We believe that this is not, when we hear sort of the whole crime control thing, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to us as health professionals. We see this as actually a health prevention bill, a health safety bill. I know that besides the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians, I know that the Trauma Association of Canada, that the National Emergency Nurses Affiliation has some support that we sort of promote injury prevention and the gun control bill. So there's a whole suicide prevention agencies, nurses unions, public health associations, frontline emergency workers have come together, in support of this particular position.
So would it be fair to summarize that essentially all healthcare providers, organizations support the gun registry?
No, I don't think that would be fair to say. I don't believe that, for instance, that the Canadian Medical Association has a position on the gun registry whatsoever. And even within an individual association, you're going to hear people that have differing views. But Carolyn and I represent certainly the board of the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians and our 1,800 members, and we are unified historically in our support for better gun control in Canada to reduce the human toll of firearms death in our emergency departments.
Are there any mental health or health organizations that you're aware of that have formally come out in favor of eliminating the gun registry?
I believe there's a suicide prevention agency in Quebec that's been firmly in support of this.
In support of ending it?
No, not.
No, that was the question.
I'm not a good listener. Just ask my wife.
Were there any mental health or health organizations that have come out saying the gun registry should be ended?
Personally, I'm not aware of that.
Mr. Momi, in terms of the amnesty that my friend across was speaking of, who put that in place? Do you know? Which government?
Conservative government.
Right. Now, I want to give you some examples of how, and I did this last day as well, some examples of how the registry, I believe, assists. And I'd like you to go through these with me. Now, court orders. If a judge makes a court order that a police officer is to go into a residence and remove firearms, and the registry indicates that there are, and I'll use the same one as last time, 13 firearms in the home, is it not helpful to a police officer if they have found 10 to know that there should be at least 3 others and they should keep looking?
It's like any other evidence. We're going to keep on looking. Absolutely. We don't depend 100% on any tool that we have at our disposal. As police officers, you make absolutely sure in a case that that you've just provided that you would continue to search. But again, it's a helpful tool that assists police in garnering the proper information to appear before a judge to get either a warrant, or in a prohibition scenario, we would certainly continue on searching the house.
If there was no registry and you had no ability to know how many guns were supposedly in the house, you would search and you would do your best, right, and find what you would find. But if there is a registry, as there is now, and it says there are at least 13 guns and you have found only 10, you will positively know that you must keep looking for at least, I know you're going to keep looking and do your very best, I agree, but you're going to keep looking for at least the 3 more because you know there's supposed to be 3 more, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, domestic violence. Long guns are used, as we know, predominantly in domestic violence situations. So I'll give you the same concrete example. If a police officer goes in and there are threats and they know that they have to do something to protect family members, and they shows them that there are 13 guns and they have found only 10, the same thing applies, they will continue to keep looking in those circumstances to protect the family because they know to look for at least 3 more, right?
Absolutely, and in fact, there's one example I provided in the package to the committee as well about a specific scenario, just as you indicate, where the family believed that the father, who was suicidal, only had 13 guns, but the reality is he had 21 guns, and that was only through the registry that police officers actually found that out. Now again, once they found the 21 guns, they continue to search.
Right.
Mr. McKenzie, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, and perhaps Chief Rich, you can confirm this, but the amnesty does not eliminate the need for licensing. It only gives people the opportunity to register their guns without a fee being charged. Is that correct? Correct. Yeah. So the amnesty is not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, it's intended to bring people into the system.
Into the fold, absolutely. Its intent is very good.
Okay. We've been registering handguns since 1930-something.
Correct.
Your problem is handguns?
Yes, and assault rifles that would be illegal in Canada.
That's right. And my understanding is the Beretta CX-4 Storm is actually a restricted weapon, and Section 391 wouldn't apply to it because it being restricted, it would be in the registry of restricted firearms, if it is.
Yeah, forgive me. I actually think it's simply a semi-automatic rifle that was actually legally registered and held by the gentleman that did the Dawson shooting.
But even if it is, it would be registered, one way or another.
Sorry, I believe so, but I'm not going to pretend I'm the expert. Yep.
But one of the problems is that we're trying to make a registry of unrestricted weapons into some form of gun control, but I think that by and large, most people would agree only 50% are in that registry. Would that fit what you're
exactly what I'm trying to say? I don't have the number. Like I say, it's always difficult to come up with the number, but a huge percentage of guns, long guns out there are not in our registry, and that's a significant problem.
And so if it's going to cost us $4.1 million a year for 50% that are in there has to be some significant cost to try and bring the other 50% into the registry.
Yes.
And it's a lot more than $4.1 million.
And my guess is if we were going to run a registry that was completely timely and accurate, it would be a lot more than $4.1 million as well.
Bill C-17, you're familiar with that? That was brought in, safe handling, safe storage, and FACs?
Right.
Not long before C-68, C-17 came into place. With the FACs, police officers interviewed people before licenses were issued.
Correct.
That system has gone.
Right. We've gone to a different background clearance system, I suppose.
And I put to you that one of the things that police officers, when they did those background checks, people with dependency problems, whether it be drugs or alcohol or mental health issues, did not get a license.
Right. My belief is that a properly trained investigator, whether a badge-carrying person or not, could do a much better job than the current system we're using.
In the current system with a PAL, I think you explained that someone talked to someone on the telephone. And
it felt like I was, trying to apply for a credit card or something.
Right. Okay. I appreciate that. And Dr. Drummond, I also come from a more rural community, and as a police officer, and I agree with you wholeheartedly in what you said about not seeing the handgun injuries. What you see are long gun injuries. You don't suppose that has something to do with not as many handguns being in rural areas as long guns are to start with? I guess what I'm saying is handguns seem to be more of an urban issue sometimes, and so what you see is what's naturally there.
I'd agree with that. Again, I'm not a criminologist. I just report what I see.
And when I said about Bill C-17, and I think perhaps you mentioned it.
Yes.
I would have seen in my time that that's the beginning of the change in the accidental deaths when it became mandatory for safe handling and safe storage and separations of guns and ammunition. That made a tremendous difference in accidental deaths, particularly in the rural area with children.
Do you mind if I answer that?
No, sure, please.
Thank you. I'll answer that. We definitely did see a decline after 1991's bill, but there's been some strong work done out of Quebec that's looked at. They've been actually able to do a time series analysis where they looked at firearm deaths, and they were able to try and tease out downward trends and putting into place legislation. And that was done by Gagné in 2008. And there they showed that with both they looked at both C-51, which was 1977, C-17 in 1991, and C-68 in 1995.
But my point would be that it's cumulative from C-17, and C-68 gets credit for much of C-17's benefits.
No, what's interesting is that she was able to tease out that regulation and actually see a much bigger decrease in both homicide deaths and suicide deaths based on that. And I would also suggest that we see that specifically in suicides.
Okay, Dr. Drummond, I think you used some statistics with female deaths. In the 2008 Stats Canada, 51 women murdered by stabbing, 34 by strangulation, 25 by firearms, and I believe that 25, 11 were long guns. Would that fit the statistics? I think Dr. Drummond had some statistics he used there earlier that were certainly larger numbers than those, but these are from Stats Canada. I'm just wondering. Okay, thank you.
Please just let us know and we'll go on to it because we're out of time. Monsieur Denoyer, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to our witnesses. I think your contribution today is significant, and it contributes a great deal to what we are doing here in terms of looking at firearms control, a very important issue to me. I'm interested in the violence side of things, the issue of domestic violence. How do police officers use this registry? How can they in the context of domestic violence? And in terms of suicide, and I think you referred to this trend, there seems to be a reduction, a decrease. And people are saying it's not strictly due to the registry, but there seem to be a number of tools that are in play, and the registry is one, and is very often used as a prevention tool. I think that's the aspect that we forget about oftentimes, the issue of prevention. For all those people who need to make use of the registry. If the registry is not up to date, perhaps we should wonder if it's not due to the conservative amnesty preventing people from registering their firearms. I think in time, if we manage to keep this registry up and running and strike the amnesty, then we could control these arms, especially the long guns, these firearms. Yes, we could save lives in the context of domestic violence, in the context of suicide. We could get those weapons, and police officers, when we know that there are weapons in a house, how do we work with that? I'll start with you in terms of suicide, then you with the domestic violence, and then finally the officers.
Well, I'd like to suggest that there's two ways that we use this registry on a daily basis as emergency physicians. I would say, starting with domestic violence, we see anywhere from 2 to 12% of women that are in our emergency department are actually currently being victimized by their intimate partners. And in fact, some studies out of the States, unfortunately we don't know this yet in Canada, 1/5 of women who've been killed by their partner were seen in an emergency department in the prior year. So I want to put that into context of how many women I see every week with domestic violence. And every single one of them, I ask about access to a firearm, because we know that there is an incredible risk of death due to a firearm in the home of an intimate partner violence. Additionally, we strongly encourage them to contact the police if the police aren't already there, with one of my main concerns being, let's get that gun out of the home. And often the police are involved, and often that is one of the ramifications of them being involved, as well as being a very strong support for women who are being victimized. In terms of suicide, it's the same thing. When a cop brings in a patient, which is actually quite common for patients that are severely depressed, often the police are involved in bringing them into our emergency departments. Again, I ask the question, is there a gun registered in this home? And if there's a gun registered in this home, I want to know that it's been taken out. And if they haven't been able to find it, that changes my safety assessment significantly.
Fédération des femmes.
Fédération des femmes? I'll answer part of your question, and then I'll perhaps let Manon expand. One of the things that we've noted is that in Quebec, 15 out of 100,000 people in the Montreal area are killed by firearms, whereas in the rural and northern areas of Quebec, Inuit regions, it would be 78 per 100,000 deaths by firearm. So even this morning I was in a meeting with a variety of women's groups, including Paturi, which is an Inuit women's group, saying that their #1 priority is to fight violence against women in the North, and that we know that the fact that there would be firearms in the home, that is a very significant factor, risk factor. Also, I spent a great deal of time in the North. I have a great deal of respect for the hunting culture in Inuit communities. I think it's important for Inuit communities to be able to continue hunting, accessing the resources on land and water. But all international instruments state that there is no custom or tradition that could possibly justify in some way jeopardizing measures that would serve to protect women. Women in the Yukon are saying that the issue of violence against women is not only the issue of death, potential death, but it's also used as a threat in domestic violence cases. Manon might have something to add.
Next round. Mr. McColeman, please.
Thank you as well to all the witnesses for being here today. It's really appreciated. I'd like to go down the First Nations road with you, Minister Edzerza, and some of your comments. Now, it's known, one of my reasons for this is because I represent the single largest First Nations in Canada in my riding of Brant, which is City of Brantford, Six Nations of the Grand, and Mississaugas of the New Credit, approximately 12,500. And I totally agree with you on the disappointment as you being the only First Nations person to be able to come and witness. That's a result of an agenda that was put forward in a very tight way by people across the table, that we weren't able to get as many witnesses as we like. But that aside, you had mentioned during your comments that you're a member of Parliament from the Yukon. I believe you used the first name Larry. I would take that as Larry Bagnall, correct? He is the voice of Yukoners, and in particular, in your case, Aboriginals in the Yukon. Is that correct? And are you aware that your MP Bagnall has been saying that he's doing everything he can to fight the 13-year long gun registry?
No, I'm not aware of it.
Well, I'll read you a quote. People in the territory pretty well know how hard I've been fighting over this over the years, Bagnall said Monday, and this comes from an article written by Jason Urena on May the 5th. And so I'm using that as the basis of that. Have you talked to your MP as to whether he is fighting this?
The last comment I heard from our Member of Parliament was that his hands are tied.
Okay, so what you're saying in that is then his leader, Michael Ignatieff, is saying he must vote a certain way.
Yes.
And and what you're saying here today, just to be sure, is he's not representing the people of the Yukon in terms of the First Nations people of the Yukon.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. If tomorrow morning he was going to have an election in our community and this was based on him getting re-elected and he was voting no, he wouldn't be down here in Ottawa.
Okay. I appreciate you saying that. The letters that have been received, and I don't know, Mr. Chair, whether it's appropriate that this go into the record or not, but this is from the Federation of Saskatchewan of Indian Nations, and there are some 71 Aboriginal leaders within Saskatchewan who have signed this letter sent to their Member of Parliament and also copied to the Prime Minister of the country, wishing to see the current system of long gun registry abolished for something that could be possibly better than this system. Are you aware of this, this one from the people of Saskatchewan, the First Nations people of Saskatchewan?
Actually, I was just made aware of it today, and I could tell you probably with great certainty that if we were to go to every chief in the Yukon, the answer would be to abolish this.
And I'll just point out, too, that I live in an area of the country, southwestern Ontario, where it's fairly significantly populated, yet that is the same opinion of my chief the elected band council chief, that would be Chief Bill Montour, who said he would be willing to come and testify to that on behalf of the largest First Nations in Canada. And this is a group of First Nations people living within what I would call an urbanized part of our country, not in the far north, certainly, but see this as something that's been foisted upon them that is not very efficient in their own community and not effective. Now, the other point I'd like to pick up on, and perhaps this to you, Chief Rich. As we've listened to testimony, I think there is a desire to have something that's effective and efficient in terms of gun control. We're not against gun control, not at all. But the system that former Chief McKenzie, as a former police chief, had brought up about interviewing people, the guns are dangerous in the hands of criminals, in the hands that it isn't the guns, it's the person behind the gun. And the chief well articulated that in a discussion from his friend. I won't use the same words you used, Minister, but and that's been said several times. So I'm just wondering, the question is about licensing and stiffening up the requirements to get a license to own a gun. Can you make comments on that?
If I was picking between the two, I would put my money into who gets a license. To me, that's the biggest single issue, and aggressively reviewing whether people have become unstable or involved in domestic violence or are mentally ill. All of those issues, that's where I would put my money.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we have about 3.5 minutes left. Mr. Holland, if you would like to use that time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, we register our car. We register our boat. We register our dog. And the reality is that registration of all of those things and guns is an important tool. Nobody would suggest that registering a car alone is going to save drivers from accidents unto itself. But we recognize when we have to stand in the line of the DMV, as I did yesterday, that it's part of the process, and it's part of being in a democratic society and having the privilege of being able to use a car or a boat or have a pet or own a gun. And the problem that I have is that when we have the Canadian Police Association, who has their membership elected, by the way, every single one of us at this table is elected, be challenged as being somehow unrepresentative of the people who elected them, or to challenge the system we have of representative democracy, then I have an issue. When we have the Canadian Police Association come to us and say they need this to do their job, when we have the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police say, this is important to us, we need it to keep your community safe. When we have medical professionals come forward in a nearly unanimous fashion, in fact, there isn't a single one who says other, then we need to keep this registry. It helps save lives. When we have all of these individuals come forward, the head of the police association, the police boards across the country say, this is essential. When the Auditor General tells us all of that costs $4.1 million a year, when we know that police are using it 11,805 times a day.
Okay, just a minute.
No, Mr. Chair, let me finish, please. I'm leading up to a question.
It's a point of order.
I only have a minute.
I'm just curious if we're going to hear a question anytime before
That's not a point of order.
Before the end of the period.
Think of this just for a second. All of that, think of it, it's overwhelming that it's being used more than 11,000 times a day.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Our leader has, Mr. Chair, I have the opportunity to lean into a question. Mr. Chair, please, I'm not trying to ask a question, please. First of all, I stand proud with a leader that will stand for keeping our community safe. I stand proud with a leader that's going to say that a system that is supported by that many professionals is one that we need to keep. And I would ask the question to anybody, why on earth would you kill something that costs $4.1 million when so many people say it's a tool they need? At the end of the day, if you don't particularly as an individual need to use that tool, then let the others continue to use it. And like the trucker that has to go drive for a living, he understands he has to register his car. It's the same thing with a gun. So my question is this. For la Fédération des Femmes de Québec, do you think this bill, and by the extension the Harper government to whom this bill belongs, stands up for women? Do you think that killing the gun registry is an effective way to combat violence against women?
Anybody want to pick up on that?
Bien sûr que non, c'est
Of course not. It's not a good way to fight violence against women. And in fact, I myself have a question for the Conservatives. Did they ask women's groups, Aboriginal women's groups, what they think about the domestic violence they're experiencing, what they think of registering firearms, and what do women in rural regions who are facing domestic violence feel when they're dealing with firearms that would no longer be covered? So we say it's irresponsible. This bill is irresponsible.
Yeah, it's my turn, Mr. Chair. No, I have a question for Mr. Moe.
You addressed this to everybody.
No, I didn't. I asked a very specific question to the Federation. I had a last question for Mr. Moe. I only have one moment, and for Mr. Detective Constable Theft.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I just want to know.
The time is up.
I just want to know. Well,
this meeting stands adjourned.